Thanks very much, Greg. I recognise everyone just sitting very still, so you can have a quick shugle and shuffle about a bit because you don't have to sit in silence when we're talking. It's not church. So the viewpoint from the BMA. Clearly all this started about talking about the contract, and it's not all about the contract. We've said that for many years, and I think this is an example, because we haven't given you a new contract yet, here you all are. You know, so things have changed, and there's a new world starting around quality and clusters, and a new role for GPs. So thinking about the GP contract, I'm not going to talk, you'll be glad to know, you might not be, that I'm not going to talk much about the actual contract, but try and put it in a context of how you're employed or paid by the NHS and how that fits into this new world. And very much, as I say, what we've been talking about is what's outside of the contract. So that one's disappeared. So on the GP role, it looks like you've got nothing to do because the slide's not showing up. But there are three key things that we're talking about the GP will do in future. You will look after patients with undifferentiated presentations. Now, that's a rather awkward phrase, but it means people who are ill or think they're ill, who can't choose to see another health professional. And the second bit's quite important. It's not about putting up barriers to what GPs, who you'll see. It's about giving people greater choice and enable you to be what you should be, which is to be a GP. And the second thing that you're going to deal with is complex care. Now, that sometimes frightens people, but it means people with more than one condition, which is almost everyone that you see. And it includes frailty. And finally, we need you to take on leadership of primary healthcare teams, to be an expert clinical generalist, the senior clinical decision maker, leading a primary healthcare team with a focus on improving the outcomes for patients. Now, that's when it gets real. It starts to talk about, it's all about making sure that what happens to patients is better because of what we do. And you don't have to scratch anyone in the NHS very much to realise we all came into it to make things better for patients. So that's at the very core of this, and we want to make it a key job of the GP to lead that team to improve those outcomes. So that's the three key things. There's a lot of things that are not in there, and therefore that's quite a shock when you think about it. But there's no getting away from the fact that a sustainable NHS in Scotland requires more care at home. There is no other answer to demographic change. I will be one of those 70-year-olds in 20 years' time, might be a bit older. If you're not going to be 70 and looked after by the system, you will be, somebody in your family will. This is very personal. We've got to make the changes that make this work, and you're a key part of that. We know that GPs direct 4 times the spend in the NHS than it costs to run the practice. If your practice costs £1 million to run, you spend £4 million worth of the NHS's money by the decisions you make. So who better to ask, are those decisions I'm making getting the best bang for the buck in terms of caring for patients? To have a sustainable NHS, one of the key things is care at home, and you'll be in the forefront of leading that. And of course, it needs resources to do that, and we're very much in the depths of discussing what that will mean for the future. So the patients look to their GPs and have a personal relationship, and at the very core of anything we talk about in the contract are those core values of being a GP. Personalised medicine, knowing your patients over a long period of time. And that's always going to be the core of what's in the GP contract. It will be underpinning everything else, as it was when the NHS started. So we're not trying to take away from those core values of general practice. We're in fact enhancing them. In fact, we want you to mainly get paid for being a GP, not for doing other things. And one of the problems with the previous contract has already been described, is it tended to make you stay in that room and also in your computers in the practice. It was all very internally focused, and it was distracting you from the real problems that the patients had. And it wasn't, in many ways, dealing with the real issues that will challenge the sustainability of the NHS. So we're trying to change that focus, but that personalised relationship of the GP with the patient is still absolutely at the core of what the contract will pay you for. So we've got this issue about should it be an internal focus or an external one? And at the moment, largely, when you're probably starting up your clusters, realistically, a lot of it will be about internal focus, what GPs are doing and how those decisions make a difference to patients. But we are increasingly building a consensus view on how you will interact with the external world. And the external world is all of the other professionals around you, but also with those who commission care, those who decide how the money is spent to deliver care both in the community and in secondary care. And we're convinced that you have a role in saying whether the money that's been spent on that service and that configuration is improving outcomes. And to do that, we need to have some transparency of data. So we increasingly talk about the GP record or the patient record, describing that patient's experience of care. It's not what you've forgotten to do, which is the way that QoF tended to make people think. If someone decided, we'll just do a quick search, oh, your figures are 20%, you're rubbish, you haven't been doing that. It shouldn't be about that. It describes the patient's care, and then you, as a leader, will be involved in saying, how can we improve that care and make sure that patients' outcomes are better? To make it safe to be fully transparent about patient data, anonymised, and deciding whether we're improving patient outcomes. So we want you to look more externally than just what happens in the consulting room. And one of the purposes of clusters was both for you to get together in a peer reference way, to look at core values-based examination of quality, say, are we good enough? Can we do this better? To have the excitement of looking around the world and say, is there someone does this better that will get better patient outcomes? So coming together as clusters in a non-commercial way, as a group of professionals, is how we decided it should happen. And obviously, you can be looking at the outcomes for patients in totality, which can include how many are cared for at home, admitted to hospital, etc. But of course, certainly in the larger areas of Scotland, that means many clusters, because we want every practice to be engaged in improving outcomes for patients. There is no place to hide from this. We're all going to be involved in it. So we thought it was vital that every practice was engaged. But it does make it slightly challenging then to get you all to agree on one thing. Getting a bunch of doctors to agree on anything is not the simplest thing in the world. And many of us are not very good. We all have our personal views on how things should be. We're not very good at coming together on a group decision about how you should change a service to improve it. We're all absolutely right. It's one of the things about being GPs. Each one of us is individually always right, including me. We're going to have to learn how to work together with colleagues to genuinely challenge each other and say, what does this mean about changing the quality of care for patients, improving outcomes? So we have to learn how to do that, and many of the groups here today are there to support you in that ambition. So we have suggested certainly that we might start bringing together some of the current advisory structures, especially in the larger areas, through the GP subcommittee, to try and collate some of those views from clusters. And again, as has been said earlier, we haven't rigidly said how you'll do that. We're suggesting this is how it could be done through existing structures which are designed to bring together groups of GPs to form a consensus view. And these can interact with the health and social care partnerships and integrated joint boards. We'll be hearing from David shortly, to give clinical advice to them on how best to spend the precious resources we have. You can usually only spend them once, and let's face it, in a period of austerity, there's not going to be a lot of money. So the money will be hard fought to get, and you'll have to spend it well. And I can't think of anyone better to advise IGBs on that than groups of GPs working effectively together. But of course, it's important to think about what impact that will have on patients. So patients generally look to their GP for most things. We would like to see a much greater offering of services to patients, that when they approach a practice, they have a choice of professionals to see, and we'll help to guide them to choose the right one to see them for the right things. That's one of the ways in which we hope to improve capacity for you to do this kind of work and to start looking at improving outcomes for patients. Our ambition is that you will have some non-patient facing time in the week to think about outcomes and quality and how you work with your team, to work in a much more professional way, to broaden your skills of quality improvement and have time to apply them and have a lower volume workload. Now, given the timescale it's going to take us to get more GPs, we're looking to other professionals to come in and assist in that workload in order to free up your capacity, because you're already way over capacity on workload. So we do think that, but from the patient's point of view, it's an increased choice of professional to meet their needs. And on that basis, you're going to be then looking at the quality and outcomes around that and what health promotion opportunities, but you don't have to do it yourself. You have to talk about how is that best done within the totality of the system. So I'm going to stop talking now and invite David Lease to come up and talk to you. He's one of the Integrated Joint Board's chief officers. So, David, we've had some very good conversations recently. David, I'll ask you to come forward.